Hi, this is Deanna Andrew. I'm at the University of Colorado here with Sabrina Sideris, who's the Director of Invest Community Studies on the Boulder campus, and what I like to consider an activist incubator of social and environmental justice. And she's going to talk to us today about changes in communication and other skills that have taken place during her career at the university. And basically, the first thing I have to say is hello, Sabrina.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
How long have you been an educator?
I have been an educator since I graduated from this program at CU Boulder, and that was in May of 2000. So initially, I was supporting other educators in this program in teaching assistant roles and in clerking and office management roles. And then I pretty quickly, in the second semester of my first year after having graduated, moved into an instructional role. So I started teaching in the spring of 2002.
All right, that's a good long time.
Yeah. Good run.
Yeah. So, tell us a little bit about being the Director of Invest Community Studies.
Okay. So I would say that my professional life and my responsibilities are divided down the middle between instruction and training and teaching and coaching and mentorship, and then administrative supporting the entirety of the organization, and that includes our other administrative staff and our other educators. And so being the director for me is about holding the reputation of our program and sustaining our staff's capacity to fulfill our mission statement, and making sure our staff and our students are happy, and nurturing our alumni community, and then nurturing all the relationships that we have in the community, in the broader community. So we do our own fundraising. That means we have relationships with funders and donors and supporters. Since we teach students, we have long-standing relationships with the family members of those students, even years after they've graduated. Since we have educators and administrative staff, we have both current ones and past ones. And so we nurture all those relationships on an ongoing basis. And I see one of the aspects of my administrative role as being a relationship builder and a relationship sustainer. And of course, a lot of that happens through communication.
It sure does. It sounds like there's a lot of communications. What changes in communications have you seen in your career for yourself and for students?
Yeah. So just this morning, I just left a coffee date with one of our alumni. He graduated back in 2008. And I was telling him about one of our current students whose interests mimic this alum's interests. And so I was telling him that they ought to get in touch. And I immediately reached for my phone, and I started to enter the two people's phone numbers and asked, are you okay with being texted, or does that cross your boundaries? Are you okay with receiving a text about work? And I think that's a question that we all have to ask now, those of us who have been maybe in higher education or in community leadership for about 20 years. Something that has really changed is that we're now so phone tied. I very commonly text students, and they very commonly text me. So that means that we all have to think about our boundaries. We have to think about work-life balance. We have to think about whether our job ends at 5 p.m. If so, are we willing to receive a text at 5:05 or 6 or 9 or 11 p.m.? And if we're not, then what norms of communication and what expectations are we putting into place with the people we work with? My coworker, who usually works right here at this desk behind you, initially upon starting her role with us, she was a little reticent to receive texts from me about work. She wanted me to send her an email or put it into a Google Doc. Nowadays, there are so many different ways to communicate with each other. We all have to articulate what are our preferences for receiving information and what kind of flow are we willing and capable of being in with each other. One of the things that I learned working with you, there's always a new way to communicate information to people, but do I always have the bandwidth to learn that new strategy or to make a promise to be on the other end of LinkedIn? Frankly, no. I just can't hold them all. So I think I get to say what methods of communication I'm willing and capable of using, both for myself and on behalf of my organization. And then I think I get to bite off as much as I can chew, but hopefully not too much more.
what about the students and like that, because you're basically the activist incubator and you're teaching the students to be activists. Has that changed, the communication changed in that area?
Oh, certainly it changes on a regular basis. We have an Instagram presence and our students help us run that. And if we didn't have that platform of communicating, there would be people that we would miss. We have Facebook as well, and we tend to use Facebook to stay in touch with our alumni who already graduated from our program, whereas we tend to use Instagram to stay in touch with the people who are currently in our program. And that is a tightrope to walk in a certain sense, you know, always being open to and willing and flexible to change as communication norms change, and being able to adapt to the newfangled thing that will come tomorrow.
Yep, there's always going to be that too.
Right.
So let's see, what skills or skill sets do you see have changed for your profession, in your profession, since 2001?
I think that something that comes with this territory that we're talking about right now is figuring out how to work with people's attention spans and figuring out how to convey information and convey importance inside of that attention span. I don't want to cater to the 45 character nature of what Twitter sets up, because I'm an educator and I work in higher education and we're cultivating people's ability to critically think and to do higher order thinking, and those things aren't necessarily compatible in every single moment of the day, right? That doesn't mean that a person who is a critical thinker can't use Twitter, but what it means is there's certain ideas and conversations and there's certain wrestling matches with our ideas and certain development of our intellect that has to happen in a different platform and that takes longer and that requires a lot of depth and some time for ideas to be planted and then for them to develop, for questions to be asked and for certain answers to arise, and then later for other answers that are perhaps complex and contradictory and juxtaposed to arise as well. So what I think is that while we are all learning from social media and from these new norms of communicating and sharing information, that we have to communicate in these ways that gets the soundbite or the tidbit across visually and in a meme. That's a skill set, but there's also still another tension there and a different set of skills that I continue to need to instill in our young leaders, and that has to do with also the patience and the ability to sit with complexity and to let information sink in slowly over time and to sit with and chew on our ideas and reflect upon them and to go back to our old ways of thinking and be willing to reconsider them.
And rework how you think about things probably and do things too.
Right. So there's a really great scholar named David Orr, and he writes in one of his pieces about the United States and the culture, and particularly pop culture, as this adolescent, having this adolescent quality. And he talks about the things that we need to do to overcome that tendency and the ways that there's certain persistent problems that are not going to be solved with that level of adolescent thinking where a clever idea presents itself and we want to go with that clever idea.
Yeah.
He talks about wisdom as opposed to cleverness, and he talks about maturing past that adolescent stage. And I think that community leaders need to know, yes, how to strategically and efficiently communicate with each other in savvy ways, but also we need to chew on and wrestle with ideas for long enough to truly consider the plethora of potential responses to those problems.
So I have to touch on this about the social media and how it's affected the program with the students as far as organizing is concerned. Do you have anything to talk about that? That has communications or skill sets changed for the students in that area a lot?
Well, we used to teach about how to get your idea or your campaign or your initiative, how to represent your idea in the media. We used to teach how to write press releases, and they would be, 8.5 by 11 page, this long, and in 3 what we now call hashtags. We used to call them pound signs. We used to teach, that skill of for immediate release and developing a relationship with someone in the local media and how to capture in a headline the story that you hope will be told, and how to nurture your relationships with local media entities throughout time, and how to have them learn to rely on you for great stories. We used to teach media strategy in a very different way than we now do, because now everything, is interconnected. And for instance, recently Invest was featured in the Daily Camera, and I knew that only a handful of people would actually make contact with the physical paper and touch it. So my first instinct was to take a picture of it and to post that on our social media, because I knew that an infinite number that's larger would actually access the story that way.
Yeah.
So that's what we do now, is we think about how the different platforms interact with and intersect with each other, and we use one to exponentially increase the power of the other.
Yeah. Awesome. That's wonderful. Do you find it more easier and more efficient to get things done then?
Yes and no. I suppose in certain ways, yes. But I guess because I teach about this stuff too, and I like to ask critical questions about it. Yes, it's easier to tell everybody in my community that we have an event on Friday at 3 o'clock in the Women and Gender Studies Cottage on the CU Boulder campus, and we hope you'll all come. Yes, that's a bit easier.
Yeah.
It's a bit easier to put that announcement out on all the different platforms and have it reach people. On the other hand, I also have more to compete with, because everyone has Instagram and everyone has Facebook and everyone's announcing their different events. And so there might be multiple people putting out another event on Friday at 3 o'clock that competes with mine. Also, there is that question of, is communicating information enough to get at the larger picture of what it is we're trying to do? I mean, ultimately, we're dedicated to making social and environmental change and building justice, and I don't think that how we communicate a piece of information is really tantamount, to achieving that change. We all still have to grow and nurture each other as change makers and skillful,
and start initiate. I guess motivation is the key word right there.
Motivation and collaboration. And so if everyone's under the impression that they can make their own media and they can get their story broadcast just by using their own Instagram or their own Facebook platform or making their own film or what have you, I think that's important and significant, but we can't lose the ability to collaborate with each other and to have conversations across difference and to go to each other and sit down and spend a long time listening to a story and really hearing each other and getting at those subtleties and nuances. I think a lot can be said in a soundbite, but then you want a person to click on that and to go to the longer version and to read the whole story too.
I totally understand it. That's really important. So do you have anything else to share with our advanced professional writing class about, and we'd like to hear about the event on Friday as well, why Detroit matters.
Yeah, sure, thanks. We have an event this Friday at 3 p.m. at the Hazel Gates Woodruff Cottage, which is the Women and Gender Studies Cottage on the CU Boulder campus. And that's right at the intersection of Pennsylvania and Broadway. And the talk is called Why Detroit Matters. And our community partner, Rich Feldman, will be coming to Boulder from Detroit, Michigan. And just about 3 weeks ago, Invest students were in Detroit with Rich. And he was showing us around, so now we're going to have him here in our space. And Invest has a long-standing relationship with community-based organizations in Detroit. And through those relationships, we explore how does capitalism change cities? How do big companies reshape cities? And how does our globalized economy fail to respect the individual worker and their needs and the environment and the physical community or city in which a company might be located? And what do we lose in that global economic relationship that maybe prioritizes the power of big companies at the expense of community-based grassroots power and the needs of the individual worker. So we'll be exploring all those topics with Rich Feldman, our guest, in the conversation Why Detroit Matters. And the city of Detroit has the capacity to offer really fantastic examples to those of us living in a really different place like Boulder about how we're all a part of a much larger economic relationship. And so I encourage you all to come. And other than that, you can follow us on Instagram and on Facebook to learn more about to learn more about Invest and to keep finding ways to communicate and connect with us.
Awesome.
Thanks.
That is awesome. I forgot to ask you about professional writing in particular.
Oh.
So has that changed? I'm sorry, I'm kind of backing up, but I did.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Your ability to convey information, I think, has to happen in a more concise way because people don't have the patience to read a long email anymore. So what that means is that any policies or procedures that need to be communicated, they need to be placed in a place online usually that's indexable and that's logical for people to look for because people don't tend to want to receive that information.
Or too much information.
In a long
They just
email.
want a little piece at a time, I think.
Right.
Everybody's
So, yeah, so think about a table of a table of contents or an index. What I have to learn how to do is to put information in the place where it really belongs and simply to send people the table of contents and tell them where to go to find what they need.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. All right, well, thank you for talking with us today, Sabrina. And
Thank you.
I am definitely going to be there on Friday.
Great.
And I hope that the class will as well. We're going to post the information as far as the location and times and directions how to get there on Canvas for the CSU students in Denver. So,
Perfect.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Everyone have a great day. Bye.
okay, goodbye. Thank you.